The organ was still playing softly when the bride turned her whole body, her long veil dragging like a banner of war. Her finger pointed straight at the last pew. "You, get out. Now." The whisper became a wave. Fans stopped, cell phones lowered. In the last row, Angela Brooks, in her simple uniform and with calloused hands, took a second to realize that decree was meant for her. Instinctively, she touched her chest. "Excuse me." The bride, Victoria Hale, stepped 2 paces down the flowered aisle, ignoring the pastor's and the groom's stares. "Don't you dare ruin my day. You don't belong here. Leave." A heavy silence fell over St. Helena's Church, in a small town in the American countryside. The stained glass windows cast colored lights on the floor, as if heaven itself was trying to remind them this was a house of forgiveness. But what everyone saw was arrogance. Daniel Carter, the groom, inhaled deeply behind his tense smile. The pastor cleared his throat. No one moved. Only Angela, who stood holding her worn-out purse. "I only came to return Mr. Henry's coat. He forgot it in the car." Her voice shook, but remained polite. Henry, the groom's father, shifted uncomfortably in the front pew, too cowardly to stand. Victoria lifted her chin. "You work in my house, not in my life. This is my wedding. I will not allow a maid to sit here like a guest." "That's disrespectful." The word maid sliced through the air like a knife. It wasn't the job that stung. It was the intent, marked in her skin, her tone, the prejudice disguised as etiquette. A murmur spread through the temple. My God, how shameful. She didn't deserve that. Angela swallowed hard. So many years cleaning, cooking, waking up before dawn to set out towels and prepare coffee. So many times helping old Mrs. Carter, the groom's mother, through her health crises. She had come that day only to return a coat and, maybe from afar, to see the smile of the boy she once raised. "Victoria." Daniel tried, his voice low. "Be quiet, Daniel." She didn't even look at him. "If you don't want trouble, ask her to leave. Now." The flower girls clutched their bouquets. One groomsman made a move to rise, but his wife gripped his arm. Nobody wanted to be the first to confront the bride at the altar. The pastor, a man of gentle words, stepped closer. "Daughter, we are in the Lord's house. Let us settle this with order, Pastor." Victoria cut him off. She was not invited. Angela lowered her eyes. She remembered the note she had left weeks earlier, congratulating the couple. "May God bless this home." She remembered when Daniel turned 8 and hugged her for baking a simple chocolate cake. She remembered when, at 17, he cried on the porch and made her a promise only the two of them knew. A sharp pain pierced her chest. "It's all right," Angela finally said with the dignity so many tried to strip away. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to offend." She picked up her purse, adjusted Henry's folded coat, and began to walk down the center aisle. The sound of her worn heels echoed among the white flowers and the whispers of those who watched, in God's house, an act without charity. "God, give me strength," she prayed silently. On the left pew, Mrs. Ruth, an old neighbor, wrung her hands. "This isn't right," she muttered, almost inaudible, but she did not stand. No one stood. The silence of the witnesses weighed as heavily as the bride's shout. As Angela passed Daniel's row, he took an involuntary step forward, but stopped, as if an invisible wall held him back. His eyes filled with tears and his throat tightened. He knew. He knew the injustice, and he knew the past promise that burned in his chest was about to surface. Victoria noticed. "Don't you dare," she hissed under her breath, her smile still plastered on for the cameras. "Don't you ruin what I've planned." Angela reached the door, sunlight outlining her silhouette. She paused, took a deep breath, and glanced at the altar. There was no hatred in her tired eyes, only a silent plea that when the truth came, it would come with justice. God does not abandon the righteous. "Angela," Mrs. Carter's frail voice rose from the front pew, but too late. The old woman clutched her handkerchief, tears streaming down. Henry supported her, tense, knowing the fragile thread of family was about to snap in public. Outside, the evening wind brushed Angela's face as she stepped into the street. Behind her, the church sank into a silence that burned. Inside, Victoria recomposed herself, as if she had cleared the path of an obstacle. "We may continue," she announced, returning to her place. "Pastor?" The pastor hesitated. Daniel didn't move. The emptiness Angela left was bigger than the entire aisle. "Son, your vows," the pastor suggested carefully. "The ceremony must go on." Daniel stared at the open Bible, but the letters blurred. Every echo of Angela's footsteps hammered his conscience. The promise of years ago, the debt of love, the secret he had carried since 17, all of it surged to the surface, choking him. Victoria noticed the hesitation and smiled at the guests, masking her urgency. "He's just emotional," she said sweetly. "Who wouldn't be? It's the happiest day of our lives." In the pews, mothers and grandmothers exchanged reproachful looks. The happiest day had begun with the expulsion of a woman who had never harmed anyone. The sin there was not of simple clothes nor of skin. It was of a proud heart. Daniel closed his eyes for a moment and saw another scene, many years earlier. A small kitchen, a harsh winter, a skinny boy receiving a warm meal and a hug. "Promise me that when you grow up you won't forget who loved you without asking for anything in return." He had promised. Before God. His hand began to tremble. "Pastor." His voice came out hoarse. "Before the vows, I need to say something." Victoria clutched his arm, her nails digging into his suit. "No," she hissed. "After." A distant thunder growled, despite the clear sky. Outside, Angela wiped her tears with the back of her hand and began to walk down the steps, trying to summon strength to reach the bus stop, Henry's coat still heavy on her arm, as if that fabric itself refused to let her walk lightly. Inside, the pastor looked at Daniel with fatherly concern. Henry bowed his head, ashamed. Mrs. Carter clutched her handkerchief, praying silently. And Victoria, triumphant, breathed a sigh of relief. For now. Because truth does not stay locked away when it was written in tears. And at that altar, before God and everyone, something was about to break. Before we continue, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. And if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. Outside the church, the golden sunlight bathed the steps. But for Angela, the world felt gray. She clutched Henry's coat tightly against her chest as if it were a shield, though nothing could protect her from the sting of humiliation. Her legs trembled, but she forced herself down the stairs. Behind her, the wedding music resumed faintly, muffled by the thick church doors like a cruel reminder that joy went on, only without her. She whispered, voice breaking, "Lord, why me? After everything I gave." Her memory dragged her back. She saw herself ironing Daniel's school uniforms late at night, her hands blistered from scrubbing. She remembered patching his torn jeans when money was scarce. She remembered feeding him when his parents argued, offering him comfort when the house felt colder than the winter outside. Tears rolled freely now, marking her face. She stopped at the gate, clutching the rusted bars, unable to take another step. Her chest heaved. I raised him as if he were my own. And now, this? A couple walking by slowed down, staring. Angela quickly turned away, ashamed of crying in public. Humiliation upon humiliation. She sank onto the low stone wall by the sidewalk, burying her face in her hands. The world blurred through her tears. Inside the church, Mrs. Carter shifted restlessly. She couldn't sit still. "Henry, she's out there crying. We can't let this happen." Her fragile voice trembled. Henry squeezed her hand, guilt etched into his face. "Ruth, please. Let's not cause a scene. Daniel will handle it." But Mrs. Carter shook her head. She knew too well the bond between Angela and her son. It wasn't service. It was something deeper, something sacred. Meanwhile, Angela wiped her face with the corner of her sleeve. She whispered softly, "Maybe I should have known better." People like me don't belong in their world. Her words were heavy, bitter, but in her heart, faith flickered faintly. She had always believed that God saw every tear, and if he saw, he would not allow injustice to last forever. A bus rumbled in the distance. Angela rose, unsteady, the weight of the coat still in her arms. Each step felt like carrying a lifetime of invisible chains. Chains of class, color, and silence. Back inside, Daniel's throat burned as he watched the door where she had vanished. Her tears haunted him, though no one else saw them. Victoria leaned close, whispering sweet poison. Forget her. Focus on us. This is our day. But Daniel's mind was far from the altar. His heart was out there, on the stone wall, crying with the woman who once saved him from despair. And deep down he knew. He couldn't stay silent much longer. The church was full, yet it felt empty. Angela's absence lingered like a shadow across the pews. No one dared look directly at Daniel, and no one dared look at Victoria either. Guests adjusted their ties, fanned themselves, or pretended to flip through the hymnals, but the silence was suffocating. The pastor cleared his throat, trying to restore dignity to the ceremony. Let us proceed, children. Today is a day of joy. But the words fell flat. Everyone had seen what happened. Everyone had heard Victoria's voice, sharp as a whip, cutting through the sacred air of the altar. On the right pew, an old woman leaned toward her daughter. Poor Angela. After everything she's done for that family. The daughter hushed her quickly. Not now, Mama. The flower girls shifted uncomfortably, their eyes wide, sensing the tension even if they couldn't understand it. One of them whispered, "Why was the nice lady crying?" No one answered. Adults looked away, ashamed, because in truth, no one had the courage to stand up. Not one. Daniel remained frozen. His jaw was tight, his hands trembling against the Bible he was supposed to read from. His eyes betrayed him, glancing over and over at the doors where Angela had disappeared. Victoria noticed and forced a bright smile, speaking loudly to fill the silence. Everyone, please don't mind the interruption. Let's return to the celebration. Love conquers all, doesn't it? A few guests gave nervous laughs, more out of politeness than agreement. Others lowered their eyes, uncomfortable. Everyone knew it wasn't love that had spoken a few minutes earlier. It was arrogance. Mrs. Carter pressed her handkerchief to her lips. Her heart broke, but her frail body couldn't rise. Henry squeezed her shoulder, whispering, "Don't, Ruth. Not now." But Ruth thought, if even God's house allows silence in the face of cruelty, then who will speak? The pastor gestured gently toward Daniel. "Son, it's time for your vows. Speak from your heart." Daniel's throat constricted. His heart was speaking, but it wasn't about Victoria. It was about Angela, about the secret, about the years of love that no one else knew. He tried to breathe, but his chest ached. Victoria leaned in, smiling at the crowd but muttering in his ear, "Do it. Say the words." Daniel swallowed, his lips trembling. The silence of the church was unbearable. A silence filled with complicity, with cowardice, with fear of the woman in white. And in that silence, one truth grew louder and louder inside him. He could not marry a woman who humiliated the person who had once saved his life. Daniel's lips parted, but no sound came. His chest rose and fell as if he had run a mile, though he hadn't moved an inch. Memories crashed inside his head, louder than the murmurs of the guests. He was 12 again, sitting at the kitchen table, shivering from the cold. His parents had been fighting all night, their voices echoing through the house like broken glass. His stomach was empty, but his heart was emptier. Then, Angela. She placed a steaming bowl of soup in front of him, her rough hands trembling from fatigue. "Eat, child. You need strength." Her voice was soft but firm, the kind that held the world together when everything else was falling apart. That night, Daniel ate, and believed he wasn't alone. Another memory hit him. He was 17. Sitting on the porch, head in his hands, tears falling because life felt unbearable. Angela sat beside him, wrapping a blanket around his shoulders. "You're stronger than you think, Daniel. But promise me one thing." He looked at her through swollen eyes. "Anything. Promise you'll never forget the people who loved you when you had nothing." And he had promised, with his whole heart. Back at the altar, Daniel's hand shook as he touched the edge of the Bible. That promise screamed inside him now. It wasn't a distant memory. It was a living debt of honor. Victoria squeezed his arm harder, smiling wide for the cameras. "Come on, Daniel, the vows. Everyone's waiting." He looked at her, and for the first time, really saw her. The arrogance, the pride, the cruelty she had just unleashed on the woman who had saved him. The contrast cut him like a knife. Guests shifted uneasily. They didn't know the full story, but they sensed the weight pressing down on the groom. Some thought he was just nervous. Others whispered that maybe the bride had gone too far. Mrs. Carter, from her pew, clutched Henry's hand. Her voice was weak, but filled with certainty. "He remembers. I can see it. He remembers." Henry closed his eyes. He knew exactly what she meant. Daniel's breathing quickened. His face paled. He couldn't keep the secret buried any longer. He thought of Angela outside, walking away in tears, thinking she was nothing. But she wasn't nothing. To him, she was everything. And if he stayed silent now, he would betray not only her, but himself, and God. The pastor's voice was calm, almost fatherly. "Son, speak from your heart. This is the moment." All eyes turned to Daniel. He opened his mouth, but the words refused to come. His conscience roared louder than any organ, louder than the whispers, louder than the weight of Victoria's hand clutching his arm. Inside, his soul was a battlefield. Say the vows and forget. It will be easier. But another voice, deeper, older, truer, whispered, "You made a promise before God. You cannot betray it now." He closed his eyes, and for a heartbeat, the church disappeared. He saw Angela's face again, not the one streaked with tears moments ago, but the face of the woman who raised him with quiet love. He heard her words echo, "Never forget those who loved you when you had nothing." Daniel's throat burned. His hands trembled so violently that the Bible nearly slipped. Victoria leaned closer, her smile sharp as a blade. "Stop embarrassing me. Repeat after the pastor. Now." But her words no longer reached him. They clashed against the storm in his chest. His conscience screamed, "If you stay silent, you are as guilty as she is." A guest coughed nervously. Another fanned herself, though the air felt icy. Everyone sensed something was wrong. Mrs. Carter, tears glistening, whispered to Henry, "He won't do it. He can't." Henry looked down, torn between fear of scandal and the truth he had buried for years. Daniel tried again, his voice breaking. I can't." The pastor frowned softly. "Son, do you need a moment?" Victoria dug her nails into his arm, her whisper venomous. "Don't you dare humiliate me." Daniel turned to her, and for the first time since the ceremony began, his eyes were steady. "Humiliate you?" His voice was low but firm. "You've already humiliated the only person who ever truly stood by me." The words weren't shouted, but they rang through the church like a bell. Guests gasped. Victoria's smile froze. The silence after his words was heavier than before. No one breathed. Daniel's conscience had spoken, and he knew there was no turning back. The church was frozen in suspense. Daniel's words, "The only person who ever truly stood by me," still echoed in the air. Victoria forced a laugh, brittle and artificial. "He's just nervous, everyone. Nerves, that's all." But Daniel shook his head slowly. His voice grew stronger. "No, this isn't nerves. This is truth." The pastor shifted uneasily, glancing between the couple. The guests leaned forward, waiting. Mrs. Carter clutched her chest. Henry bowed his head, already knowing what was coming. Daniel took a deep breath, his voice trembling but resolute. You all saw what happened. You all saw how Angela was treated. She's not just a maid. She's not just someone who works for my family. She saved me." Gasps rippled through the pews. Victoria tightened her grip on his arm, whispering furiously, "Stop it. You'll ruin everything." Daniel pulled his arm free. "Everything? What's everything worth if it's built on lies?" The silence deepened. Daniel's gaze swept across the church, meeting the confused eyes of the guests, the tear-filled eyes of his mother. His voice broke. "When I was a child, when I was lost, it wasn't money, or status, or even my own family that kept me alive. It was Angela. She raised me as her own son when no one else was there." Murmurs erupted. An old man whispered to his wife, "Raised him? What does he mean?" Daniel's eyes glistened. "The truth is, without her, I wouldn't be standing here today. Every achievement, every step I've taken, I owe it to Angela Brooks. She is not just part of my past. She is my family." A collective gasp swept the church. Victoria's face paled, her perfect mask cracking. She tried to laugh it off, her voice shrill. "Family, don't be ridiculous, she's staff. Nothing more." Daniel's voice thundered, sharper now. "No, Victoria, she's more of a mother to me than you could ever imagine." The church fell utterly silent. Mrs. Carter finally wept openly, her frail body shaking. Henry covered his face with his hand, unable to look anyone in the eye. The truth was no longer hidden. The pastor closed his Bible gently, whispering to himself, "Lord, have mercy." Victoria's hands trembled, clutching her bouquet so tightly the flowers bent. She hissed through clenched teeth, "You're humiliating me in front of everyone." Daniel looked at her, his voice calm but unshakable. "No, Victoria, you humiliated yourself when you threw Angela out of God's house." And in that moment, everyone in the church knew the ceremony would never be the same again. The whispers inside the church grew louder, like a storm building. "She raised him? What does he mean by that? Is it true?" Victoria's face was flushed, her hands trembling. "Enough, Daniel," she hissed. "You're humiliating both of us. Tell them it's just nerves. Tell them." But Daniel's voice carried across the sanctuary, strong and unshakable. "No, Victoria. They deserve the truth." He turned toward the guests, toward the very altar where moments ago he was supposed to pledge his life. "Angela Brooks isn't just someone who worked for my family. She is the reason I am who I am today." His voice cracked with emotion. "When my parents were too busy chasing wealth, when our home was empty of love, it was Angela who held me when I cried. She fed me, she taught me to pray, she kept me from giving up on life itself." The crowd gasped again. Some nodded, others wiped their eyes. The truth was cutting deep. Then Daniel added, almost whispering, but the silence made every word echo. "She's more than family. She's my second mother." Mrs. Carter sobbed loudly, unable to hold it in any longer. "It's true," she cried from the pew. "Angela has been Daniel's guardian angel since the day he was born. I was sick for years. If it weren't for her, I would have lost him. We all would have." Henry, ashamed, nodded, confirming his wife's words. Gasps, murmurs, even a few cries spread across the church. Guests who moments ago sat in silence now looked at one another with disbelief and guilt for not defending Angela. Daniel continued, his voice filled with conviction. "The woman you saw thrown out of this church is the woman who raised me when I was abandoned in every way that mattered, and today you treated her like dirt." He turned toward the closed church doors, his eyes burning with regret. "Angela should never have been pushed out. She deserves to be honored." Victoria shook her head violently, her perfect curls trembling. "Stop it. You'll destroy everything. You're making a fool of yourself." But her voice sounded desperate now, not powerful. The guests' eyes were no longer on her. They were on Daniel, and on the empty door where Angela had walked out. The truth had been spoken, and nothing would silence it again. The church was no longer silent. Whispers swirled like waves crashing against Victoria. How could she do that to Angela? He said she raised him, and the bride humiliated her? In God's house? Victoria's face, once radiant with pride, twisted with panic. She looked around, desperate to find one friendly face, but even her bridesmaids avoided her eyes. "Don't listen to him," she cried, her voice shrill. "He's confused. Angela is just a maid." The word maid now sounded bitter, poisonous. The congregation recoiled. A woman in the second row shook her head firmly. "Shame on you." Others began to murmur in agreement. Some even crossed their arms, refusing to clap or smile anymore. The room, once her stage, had become her courtroom. Victoria turned on Daniel, her voice trembling with rage. "You're throwing away everything we built. For her? For that woman?" Daniel met her eyes, steady and calm, no longer afraid. "I'd rather lose everything than lose my soul." The words struck harder than a slap. The guests gasped. A man in the back whispered, almost reverent, "He chose truth." Victoria's mask cracked completely. Tears of anger welled in her eyes, smudging her flawless makeup. She stamped her heel against the marble floor. "This is my wedding. Do you hear me? Mine. And none of you will ruin it." But her voice, instead of commanding respect, rang hollow. The pastor shook his head sadly, closing the Bible. Mrs. Carter, weak but determined, whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear, "A wedding built on cruelty cannot be blessed." The crowd murmured in agreement. The tide had turned. Victoria spun toward the guests, her desperation plain. "Don't judge me, she's beneath us. She doesn't belong here." But this time the silence that followed was not compliance. It was condemnation. A silence that screamed louder than words. "We saw. We will not forget." Victoria's hands shook. For the first time in her life, she wasn't admired, envied, or obeyed. She was pitied. She was despised. And the bride who once believed she owned the moment realized the moment had turned against her. The church doors creaked open. Heads turned instantly. Gasps filled the air. Angela stood there, her figure framed by the sunlight. Her eyes were still red from crying, but there was something new in her posture. Dignity. Strength. The congregation rose instinctively, not in applause, but in reverence. Murmurs swept across the room. She came back. God bless her. Look at her. Walking with her head held high. Victoria's jaw dropped. No, she can't. She's not supposed to be here. But Daniel's face lit up with relief. He took a step forward, his voice steady and full of pride. "Angela, please come closer." Slowly, Angela walked down the aisle. The same aisle she had been forced to leave moments ago, but this time each step felt like a victory. The shame was gone. The whispers were no longer against her. They were for her. Mrs. Carter struggled to her feet, her body weak but her voice clear. "Everyone stand. Stand for the woman who saved my son." And one by one the guests obeyed. People rose to their feet, turning the moment into an unspoken tribute. Angela's tears returned, but now they were not of humiliation. They were of justice. Daniel met her halfway and took her hand, his voice breaking. "I should have stopped it sooner. Forgive me. You don't belong outside these walls. You belong here, honored, in front of everyone." Angela shook her head softly. "I don't need honor, Daniel. I just need truth." He nodded, his eyes full of fire. "Then let the truth be known. I wouldn't be alive, I wouldn't be standing here if it weren't for this woman. She gave me love when no one else did. She gave me life." The church erupted, not in chaos, but in applause. People clapped, some cried, others whispered prayers. The tide of shame had turned into a tide of respect. Victoria stomped her foot, her voice desperate and cracking. "Stop it. She's nothing. She's just a maid." But this time, her words fell flat. No one listened. No one cared. Angela stood radiant in her humility, stronger than the bride in her gown of pearls. For the first time, Victoria was truly alone. And for the first time, Angela was truly seen. The applause slowly faded, but the weight of the moment lingered. All eyes were on Daniel, standing between Angela and Victoria. One hand held the woman who had raised him, the other still bore the ring he was supposed to place on his bride. The pastor cleared his throat gently. "Son, the choice is yours." Victoria, her makeup streaked, clutched her bouquet with trembling fingers. "Daniel, please, don't do this. We can still fix it. Say the vows." "Forget her." Her voice was no longer commanding. It was begging. But Daniel's answer came with calm finality. "How can I marry someone who despises the very person who saved me? How can I build a home on pride and cruelty?" Gasps echoed once more. Victoria shook her head violently, dropping her bouquet to the floor. "You'll regret this. You'll regret throwing me away." Daniel looked at her, his voice steady. "No, Victoria. The only regret I'd ever carry would be betraying Angela and betraying myself." The pastor closed the Bible with a solemn nod. "Then this ceremony cannot continue. A union without truth is not a union at all." The guests broke into murmurs. Some whispered prayers. Others shook their heads at the fallen bride, who now stood pale and trembling, her dream in ruins. Angela tried to pull her hand away, whispering to Daniel, "Don't end your happiness for me, I don't need this." But Daniel shook his head. His eyes shone with peace. "Angela, you taught me what real happiness is. It's not luxury. It's not status. It's love. And if this is what love looks like, then walking away is the only right choice." He turned to the congregation, his voice carrying to every corner of the church. "This wedding is over." A stunned silence filled the sanctuary. Victoria gasped, stumbling back, humiliated before all. No applause, no sympathy followed her anymore. Only silence. Daniel then turned back to Angela, his voice tender. "You gave me a life when no one else cared. You are my family. And today, I want the world to know that I honor you. Not in secret, but openly. Before God and everyone here." Tears streamed down Angela's face. The applause began softly, then grew louder, filling the entire church. Some cried openly. Others whispered, "God bless her, God bless him." Victoria fled the altar, her heels clattering against the marble floor, her pride shattered. But no one followed her. She left as she had lived, in arrogance, alone. Angela and Daniel stood together, surrounded not by shame but by respect. For the first time, Angela wasn't invisible. She was celebrated. The pastor lifted his hand in blessing. "Today we have witnessed not a wedding, but something greater, the triumph of truth. May this serve as a reminder that God never abandons the righteous." The organ played softly, not for a bride and groom, but for a greater victory, the victory of justice. Angela whispered, her voice trembling but firm, "Thank you, Lord. You never left me." And with that the story ended, not with rings exchanged, but with hearts set free.